Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Congressman Darren Soto's Small Business Town Call. My name is Sheyla Asencios. I'm Congressman Soto's District Director, and I'll be moderating today's call. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We hope you find this call informative. We wanted to provide a safe way for you to speak with the Congressman one-on-one amid this rapidly evolving outbreak. Our goal is to maintain open lines of communication among government and the business community. In a moment, I'll turn this over to Congressman Soto. But first, I wanted to explain the format for today's call. If you would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. Or you can unmute yourself by clicking on the top right-hand corner of your video image if you joined in by Zoom video. When you are unmuted, please say your name and title. When you are not speaking, please mute yourself to avoid background noise to interrupt our call. This call is going to last an hour and a half. If we are unable to address all of your questions today, please feel free to send your inquiry directly to me. Again, my name is Sheyla Asencios. My direct phone number is 407-485-4408, or you can send me an email at Sheyla, S-H-E-Y-L-A .Asencios, A-S-E-N-C-I-O-S @mail.house.gov. We're ready to begin. Congressman Soto?
Thank you, Sheyla. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our small business coronavirus town hall meeting. We know this is an unprecedented crisis, an unprecedented pandemic that requires an unprecedented response. Families are at home wondering how they're going to care for themselves and their loved ones. And they're also playing the role of teachers with so many of our students and young people at home. There are thousands of people across Florida and hundreds of thousands across the nation that have contracted the COVID-19 virus, and we know they're fighting for their lives. Our seniors are having to stay in isolation and not able to speak with or be with so many of their family members given their vulnerabilities, along with those with pre-existing conditions. Our young people are facing missing milestones in their both academics and their personal lives. Our first responders and our healthcare professionals, they're fighting on the front lines to make sure that they could help so many who have contracted this virus, yet they're also trying to help themselves and their families. Our veterans, those who've lost their jobs, and of course, our small businesses are hurting. And so we wanted to take a moment today to go through the basics of what you need to know as a small business in Central Florida, and thank you in advance for what you do to keep our economy running. In Florida, we have as many as 6,741 COVID-19 cases as of last night. Together, we will get through this. We've seen healthcare models that suggest we could see the peak of the coronavirus in Florida by May 9th. Of course, it will be different in different areas. We will listen to experts and make critical decisions to save lives, and we will get through this pandemic. We brought together an expert group of panelists to help in this discussion today. We are joined by Sanchez, President and CEO of the Florida Bankers Association, David Altig, EVP and Director of Research at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Carl Hadden, Associate Director, Small Business Development Council for the Mumia College of Business in USF, otherwise known as our SBDCs, and of course, Althea Harris, Lead Economic Development Specialist from the U.S. Small Business Administration, South Florida District. Thank you all for being here, and we'll hear from them in just a few minutes. As we face this unprecedented crisis, it is important for all of our small businesses to know that help is on the way, for all of our workers to know that help is on the way. Last Friday, we took the perilous journey back up to Washington to make sure to make a quorum call vote to pass the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, which I will refer to as the CARES Act from here on out. This is a landmark $2.2 trillion coronavirus economic relief package. It represents the largest economic relief package ever passed by the Congress in the history of this nation. A few of the important details generally. First, we will have $1,200 stimulus checks going out to most Americans who make $75,000 a year or less. For those who make between $75,000 and $99,000 a year, you'll receive smaller checks. Families will also receive $500 per child. So your average family of four with a married couple that combined makes $150,000 or less with two children can expect to see a check for $3,400. We expect those checks to go out mid to late April of this month. And it will be based on your 2018, 2019 tax returns. And you'll receive the funds in the same way you receive your tax refund check, whether it's through direct deposit or whether it's through physical check to your residence. In addition, there'll be a 6-month forbearance on student loans for so many of our students who are in need. We have a robust $600 federal unemployment benefit per week for up to 4 months. That will be on top of the $275 per week in-state benefits that you could receive for up to 12 weeks. And those benefits will be able to be received through the same process with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. And I know there has been some lag in the system. We will talk about some of the landmark funding we've gotten to Florida so they could get the job done. And while I'll go into that part of the program a little bit today, we also will have a constituent town hall meeting tomorrow where we will be going into that program at length. The key part of today's teletown hall will discuss the $367 billion loan program for small businesses. This will be critical for so many of you, and we'll discuss greater details in a moment. There's also a $500 billion lending fund for major industries, cities, and states. We learned from the past with the Great Recession by creating an oversight board and to make sure that we are avoiding risky behavior, abuse, and fraud. We are making sure this money can't be used for excessive executive bonus pay or share buybacks or for excessive dividends. We will learn from the past, and we're very pleased by those changes in this bipartisan bill. There will be $130 billion for hospitals and our health systems. We know they're on the front line, our doctors, our nurses, our EMTs, our firefighters, and our cops, and they need to have the funding that they need to get the job done. There'll be $48.9 billion for food assistance to make sure so many of our families who are getting their meals through their schools or through food banks, our seniors through Meals on Wheels, so many other programs will remain funded, as well as our farmers, growers, and ranchers throughout Florida's 9th Congressional District in Central Florida. They will receive help as well, as they are creating more than 50% of the food we are eating in a lot of these programs. There's a $30 billion education stabilization fund. Half will go to K through 12 education. Half will go to higher ed, and it will assist with the coronavirus response and technology expenses for distance learning. We know so many of our teachers, like my wife Amanda, are working from home to help our parents educate our kids. There's an additional $19.57 billion to help care for our service members and veterans in our VA hospitals as they're managing the coronavirus pandemic. And finally, there is $48.5 billion to help with local transportation and housing needs, including Orlando International Airport, Sunrail and Lynx, our Citrus Connection in Polk County, and our emergency housing needs. We have also led on a few letters, including one to the Supreme Court, to stop the foreclosures and evictions from happening during the national pandemic when so many Floridians are ordered to stay home. They've agreed by suspending writs of possession in the meantime. And of course, we'll be helping landlords with funding that will be discussed here today. We also appreciate the utilities for stepping up after our second bipartisan letter requesting no utility shutoffs during the national pandemic. While people are staying at home, they need access to power, they need access to clean water and to waste services. And we're so proud of our private sector for stepping up in that regard too. And Florida will have its share with over $8.3 billion coming in addition to community development block grants that will be announced tomorrow. So now I want to go into briefly the small business frequently asked questions, and then we're going to turn to our esteemed panel to help out with their perspectives and what they're doing. Through the CARES Act, we have the Small Business Payroll Protection Program. Let's start out with the big picture questions. Who is eligible? All small businesses with 500 employees or less will be eligible. This includes for-profits, nonprofits, sole proprietors, LLCs, LLPs, partnerships, and any other types of businesses. And yes, one-person self-employed companies, independent contractors, and others who work in the gig economy, they will also be eligible for these payroll protection loans. Another question is, how much can you borrow? You can borrow a $10,000 emergency loan, which can be rolled into the other major loan that we'll be spending most of the time talking about, and that is the Paycheck Protection Loan. You can secure a payroll protection loan up to 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs for up to $10 million. The payroll costs that we will be looking at, your average monthly payroll costs, exercise a broad definition. It includes salaries, wages, and commissions, tips, payments for vacation, parental, family, and sick leave, costs for healthcare, such as health benefits and insurance premiums, retirement benefits, state and local tax assessments on employee compensation, and income for sole proprietors and independent contractors, not in excess of $100,000. So when we're talking about payroll, we're talking about pretty much most of the expenses you would spend on your employees. There will be no personal guarantee or collateral required, and you will be able to verify using your prior payrolls submitted to the IRS, and will be required to sign a document stating that you won't seek duplicate loans from another lender. The deadline to apply will be June 30th of this year, but we're going to want you to apply as soon as possible. Secretary Mnuchin mentioned that we should be able to have this up and running by as early as this Friday, April 3rd. And we'll hear more about that from our SBA bankers, SBDCs, and others on the call. Another key portion is the loan forgiveness piece. Many have heard that these loans don't have to be paid back under certain circumstances. So how does that work? The loan could be 100% forgiven, provided that the small business maintains 100% of average monthly payroll for the next 2.5 months, up to June 30th, 2020. So if you keep your employees and you pay them for the next 2.5 months, the federal government will take the unprecedented step to pay 100% of your payroll costs. This is all about keeping Central Floridians, and Americans in general employed as you, our frontline businesses, our small businesses, are able to stay afloat and keep working. Recently terminated employees can be rehired prior to next payroll or certain limited circumstances after that, and you could still get loan forgiveness in full amounts. So for those of you who felt the need under the circumstances to have to terminate people already, you have the potential to hire them back as you apply for these loans and get 100% credit for them having rehired them back. A borrower seeking forgiveness will be submitting documentation to verify payroll, numbers of employees during the covered period, and documentation on reimbursable costs such as mortgage payments, rent, utilities, and certification that the documentation is true and correct. And yes, you can use these payroll costs for all legitimate business costs in addition to payroll. The lender should be able to issue a decision on the application for forgiveness within 15 days of receipt of this documentation, and within 90 days after determining forgiveness, the FDA or the SBA should be able to remit payments directly to the lenders. If you do terminate employees or otherwise lower your payroll, you'll get credit. This won't be an all or nothing thing. You'll get credit for the percentage of average monthly payroll maintained until June 30th, 2020. So you'll still get partial help no matter what. And of course, you could borrow over that. If you don't use all the funds for payroll and and you need to borrow in excess of payroll, you'll be able to use it for expenses such as rent, utilities, supplies, and other expenses. If it doesn't go beyond the payroll loan, it'll be 100% forgiven. If you have to borrow more or you had to terminate people or other circumstances we'll discuss today where part of the loan is not forgiven, we'll be using some pretty familiar SBA repayment terms like 6 to 12 months deferral on payments, 10-year amortization schedule, 4% cap on interest, no prepayment penalties. And in addition, we have waived many fees, including annual and guarantee fees, which are waived. We've also provided to chambers of commerce and many folks who have signed on to this meeting already, a U.S. Chamber of Commerce summary that you could also turn to after this town hall. In addition, we have submitted the application we just received yesterday, which is a much shorter form than the normal SBA loan application because of the lack of need for security and collateral and personal guarantees. And hopefully you will review those as well as the instructions provided. From here, lastly I want to go into is that we expect over 1,800 participating lenders to be involved in this process. So as you'll hear momentarily from Sanchez from our bankers, you'll be able to, most of you, work with your existing lender. And for those of you without a lender relationship or with a non-participating lender, you'll be able to go to your local SBA or SBDCs. Of course, we have them on the line too. And so with that, I want to make sure that we're getting to our pros here on the line. And then after their comments, we're going to go a little bit into our district survey and take questions. So with that, let's start with Sanchez, President and CEO of the Florida Bankers Association, for his comments. I know he has to leave early, so we are happy to accommodate him to be able to start with those comments. And from there, we'll continue on down the line. So Alex, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being here.
Congressman Soto, thank you for your leadership. It's leaders like you who have come together in a bipartisan effort in Washington at the time of need for our country to do this CARES Act bill. So thank you for your leadership, Congressman. And to all the participants in this call, obviously this is a historical time that our country is living in. And I really hope that everyone on this call, all sole proprietors, folks who are in business for themselves, who have a small business, will take advantage of this CARES Act and how it's specifically called the Paycheck Protection Program, as the Congressman alluded to earlier. It is here for you. It is here to bridge this time period that we're going through to help you with your payroll for your employees, to hopefully keep our economy and our country strong. So I would encourage you, the loan applications, Congressman, as you know, begin April 3rd. So really for all the participants on this call, I would ask you to go to your FDIC bank in your community and start the process now. I would highly recommend you go see your FDIC insured banker. There's other lenders, of course, that you can go to. And start the application process now to get that application in sooner versus later to help your small business during these difficult times. As the congressman said, there'll be no personal guarantee required. There's no collateral required for the loan. Obviously, the good faith of each American now is being counted on by people like Congressman Soto and leaders like that our country has to pull together, come together, and really submit the paperwork that you need for the true lost wages and such related matters that your small business has gone through. But if you're a small business owner, I would encourage you to do that. My youngest daughter has her own business, and so she's a sole proprietor, works at home. If you're in that type of position, then those applications for this program begin on April 10th. So keep those dates in mind. But April 3rd, this Friday, I would go to your FDIC bank now, Congressman, and I would ask your constituents to do that and get the paperwork started. I think the SBA, I just got off the phone with the SBA before getting on this call, and they're gearing up. They're overwhelmed, quite frankly, with all the requests they're coming in. But I think they will be ready to start submitting. But if I could add these two programs too, Congressman, the SBA has another emergency COVID-19 relief program, not part of the CARES Act, that I would recommend that your constituents go to directly, and they can borrow there up to $2 million. And some of that's forgiven as well. And then there's bridge loans by the state of Florida Emergency Fund that they also can access, in addition to the program that you and I are discussing here today.
Thank you for discussing those additional options. While a lot of my focus will be on the emergency loan and on the payroll protection loan today as part of the CARES Act, as Mr. Sanchez mentioned, there'll be other options. And he was right on discussing about how you need to contact your lender sooner rather than later, and that applications will start this Friday. We've already sent you all the applications, those of you who work through your chambers or reached out directly to my office. If not, please reach out to our office. We could get you that application by tomorrow. It's only a few pages, which should be a relief to a lot of you, but even helping fill it out in advance so that you can go in on Friday and have a lot of the information gathered regarding your payroll, regarding the filled out application, regarding your business costs, all those things, very helpful. And Alex, my only question for you, knowing you have to go and we appreciate all the help, is how's it been working with Treasury, working with SBA and others? I know this is a huge task we're asking for our 1,800 participating lenders across the nation. How's that been going?
You know, they're overwhelmed right now, Congressman. The SBA is, the Small Business Administration. They're running up the escalator as fast as they can, and I know they're trying their best. And I think we're gonna, at the end of the day, things will work out. One thing I do want to say to your participants and your constituents, Congressman Soto, is just to let them know how this is going to work. So they'll go to their lender, fill out this application that you mentioned, get the paperwork to the lender as required, and that U.S. Chamber summary that you mentioned earlier is excellent. And then the lender will submit, the bank will submit the paperwork to the Small Business Administration, get approval, and your money will come from that bank. It's not like you're going to get a check from Washington, and because this is to all the constituents and participants on this call. That's why Congressman Soto did it this way, so that it would be accessible to you hopefully sooner versus later. And so the monies will come directly from the bank once they get approval from the SBA. to get this money in your hands faster?
Thanks for that, Alex, and we appreciate your leadership. Next, we're going to hear from David Altig, EVP and Director of Research for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Dave, thanks for being here. We know the Fed has been working overtime to help stabilize the lending market and major businesses, and we look forward to hearing your testimony on those important efforts.
Well, thank you, Congressman Soto, both for allowing us to participate in this town hall and for your efforts on behalf of all of us. I hope everyone on this call and your families are as well as you can be under the circumstances. Needless to say, we understand the extreme stress that everyone in the economy is under, and small businesses certainly are behind. I'm going to just be very brief and kind of note the contributions that the Federal Reserve is attempting to make during the crisis. And they really sort of fall into three buckets. And the first and foremost is an attempt to maintain the flow of credit, both to households and to businesses, and small businesses in particular. We have basically pulled out all of the tools that we're finding in the toolbox to do that, starting with working with lenders and banks in particular directly, both in terms of providing funding through our typical lending channels to banks, but also in providing supervisory guidance and working with them as they work with you to resolve pressures that are arising as a result of the rather extreme circumstances. And we are always very interested in understanding how that is going and whether or not cooperation is reigning, is sort of reigning the day, and any particular issues that might be arising on that front that we might be helpful with regard to. The second major area, of course, is just to provide through our standard monetary policy channels support for the economy, and in particular support for the recovery once we get towards the other end of the immediate problems. The most obvious element of that is interest rates have been taken about as low as they can go. We're at zero, and the committee has, Federal Open Market Committee, has given the guidance that they will remain low as long as is necessary to support general business activity, employment, as we move forward on the other end of this. The third piece has to do with our coordination with Treasury as directed by the Congress to find other ways that we can provide liquidity and support to the small business sector in particular. So I know many of you are waiting to hear details of the Main Street lending program. I unfortunately have nothing I can really share with you at this point with respect to either details for sure, but even a timeline. The only thing that I can tell you is that Treasury and the Board of Governors continue to work very hard on hammering out the details of the program, again, in concert with sort of the direction that has been given from Congress through the CARES Act. Obviously, we also are working with the SBA in any way we can, again, to implement any of the particular policies that are part of making the CARES Act and general support for the economy as effective as it can be. Part of this is in our emergency powers. We've stood up an element of the term asset lending facility to support SBA securitized markets, again, with the aim to make sure that we're using all the tools at our disposal to keep credit flowing to the economy as we work through the difficulties associated with the basic shutdown of the economy associated with fighting the COVID-19 scourge. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Congressman.
Thank you, Dave. And we appreciate Chairman Powell's aggressive reduction of interest rates quite quickly to make sure that we are stabilizing our financial markets. For our small businesses, many of you may know this will relate to you in many ways, from existing loans that you have to stabilizing the bond market and lending market to make sure that the major companies that many of you may do business with are still able to keep their doors open and do business as they can in light of the coronavirus. So for those of you with contracts or services being provided to different major businesses, some of them are continuing to operate with that flexibility because of the great work that the Fed did quickly. And we also know that that's a big part of how the banks are able to remain liquid, in addition to the reforms under Dodd-Frank back in the day. And finally, we look forward to the rollout of the Main Street program. For right now, we already have a robust $367 billion program for the next 2.5 months. So we're hopeful that you all can dovetail that Main Street program in as we're getting to that June 30th deadline for those businesses who will still need it. And we're also going to talk later on about where we may be going next. So thank you for that, Mr. Altig. And next, I know many of you have been waiting to hear from both our SBDCs and our SBA. We're honored to have one of our local folks serving Florida's 9th Congressional District, Carl Hadden, Associate Director for the Small Business Development Council. Carl, thanks for being here, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, good afternoon, and to echo the previous speakers, Congressman Soto, thank you for taking the time to set up this call and inviting myself and the other experts to kind of share information with the constituents about the services and support that is available to the business community. Just a little bit about the Florida SBDC. We're part of a nationwide network that was established back in 1976 by some of Congressman Soto's predecessors in Congress. We are primarily funded through the SBA, and our role is to provide support services to all businesses who meet the SBA guidelines as a small business. This is done 365 days a year, but in a time of disaster here in Florida, the Florida SBDC network is actually part of the state of Florida's emergency response team. And we play a support role to assist with both state and federal disaster recovery programs. At the state level, as the Congressman mentioned in the introduction, we have the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan Program. That bridge loan program has been around since Governor Jeb Bush set it up, I don't know how many years ago. And what that program does is it provides a short-term zero-interest loan to Florida businesses who qualify that will give them quick working capital to keep their business operational until they can get connected with either federal disaster recovery and a long-term loan through the SBA, which I'm sure going to talk about shortly, or in the time of a hurricane type of situation, they can settle with their insurance company. I will tell you that between direct inquiries to our region and through inquiries through the DEO for our region, we have over 4,500 requests for assistance with that bridge loan program. And our coronavirus page of our website has seen about 20,000 visitors just in the last period of since the COVID began. So, you know, we have a team of about 20 consultants spread out over a 10-county region. As you can tell by my background, we're all working remotely due to the stay-at-home orders and trying to keep the curve flat, as people have been saying. Many of us have been working very long hours, 7 days a week, trying to keep up with the flow of requests for service. So if you have already requested service, please be patient, show kindness. We are all doing the best we can to get through the volume of inquiries that we have. But we are tracking each person through a workflow, so we can provide reporting and status. One of the things that I would like to share with people is that in order to apply for the state program, that's a 100% online application process now through the Florida DEO. And all the links to all of the programs are at our website, which is sbdctampabay.com/coronavirus. I will share that many of Congressman's constituents are in the Orlando region. Your district covers 2 SBDC regions. So for the folks in the Orlando area, that would be sbdcorlando.com, and it would connect you with the SBDC resources in your counties. So with that, I think that's all the general information I wanted to share about the Florida SBDC. I don't want to really get into the SBA loan programs. We do assist clients in getting connected with that, and we help educate them and help them, and we review their documentation before they submit to the SBA in an attempt to make sure it's a complete application before it is submitted, to hopefully streamline that process and not have that get kicked back for some of the common mistakes that we see. So we are directly involved with the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan Program, but we are also a resource for small businesses who are trying to get connected to the SBA programs as well. So please reach out to us online, and we'd be happy to help you.
First, Mr. Hadden, thank you so much for your tireless efforts and those of your peers at the SBDC. We know anytime you have a rollout of a major program, whether it was Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or the ACA or the American Investment Act and now the CARES Act, it is a tremendous effort that requires everybody to work together. So thank you for those tireless efforts. And I know so many of the hundreds of businesses on this call, those folks, thank you as well. We were excited to be able to provide $265 million in the CARES Act for the SBDC resource partners. So that's very helpful. What would help it for those of us, those folks who are online with small businesses who may not be with a participating lender and decide to go then to the SBDCs, what would be the first steps that you'd recommend for them to do if they're on the line today?
The first step would be, if you're not already an SBDC client, to visit either the sbdctampabay.com or SBDC Orlando, depending on your county. Businesses who are located in Polk County, we're part of the Tampa Bay region. For those in Osceola, Orange County area, you're part of the Orlando or UCF region, and request consulting services. I can speak for the USF team. That gets you put into a queue to be assigned to a consultant. And then once you're assigned to a consultant, they will kind of tell you what exactly, obviously they'll talk to you and find out what the needs of your company are, see what programs you possibly are eligible for, and then help guide you through the application process. Now with the emergency bridge loan, we actually facilitate that entire process. We upload the documents, we facilitate the closing. So we're very hands-on with the emergency bridge loan process. The main thing that I would tell businesses is please, when you look at the application, pay attention to the required supporting documents. I don't think I've seen a complete 100% complete application on the first round yet. Most of them are missing tax returns, or they're missing documentation that for employees like 940s or 941s, so that we can check the box that they meet the employee requirements. So just pay attention to the required documentation, because that will accelerate the process, because many times it takes a couple days of email exchanges with the applicant to get 100% of what we need to move forward with that loan application.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hadden. And just as a reminder, we have over 1,800 private lenders participating. So most of you will be going to your local bank or credit union that you already have an existing relationship with because they may be SBA qualified already. And those of you who already have existing relationships with your SBDCs, it would be helpful to go to your SBDCs. But for those of you who don't have access to either of those, Carl and the great folks at SBDCs do a wonderful job, and we just need to bear with everyone. And thanks for the helpful tips on filling out the application, which is, by the way, significantly smaller than the normal applications. Isn't that right, Mr. Hadden?
Absolutely. It's a very short document. It's about 7 pages, but a couple of them are just checklists for what you need to include. I did see a chat question pop up to me from Mr. Granger. His question was that he said that he submitted a paper application on March 20th, and he asked if he needed to reapply online. That's a great question because when the governor first activated the emergency bridge loan program, the process was to apply with a paper application and send it in to the local SBDC or through the state SBDC. And then last week, there was a process change where everything went to an online application process through the Florida DEO website. For the folks who applied before the changeover, which I believe was March 25th, you do not need to reapply. You're already in the queue, so you will be served as quickly as we can get to you, but you don't have to apply a second time through the website if you've already submitted your paper application before the March 25th switchover.
Thanks for those helpful tips, and we'll continue to be discussing those with our SBDC specialist in Carl Hadden, and we're honored to also have Althea Harris, who is the lead economic development specialist with the U.S. Small Business Administration South Florida District. Thank you, Ms. Harris, for being on. We know how busy you all must be, so I know on behalf of all the small businesses on the call in and around Florida's 9th Congressional District, thanks for taking the time out to speak to us today.
Oh, thank you, Congressman, for pulling this together. It's really important to us in the South Florida District Office that we reach every corner of our district. And with, thankfully, with technology, we're able to do that, especially when you help us by pulling it all together. So thank you so much for doing that. We are running the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. That is a decades-old program that you, small business owners, and private nonprofits can access to get up to $2 million to pay your ordinary business expense because of the disaster disruption. So that application is available online at sba.gov/disaster. Since the disaster was activated a few weeks ago, the website has undergone many changes. The application process has changed, and it has changed again now that the CARES Act was passed about 5 days ago. So the application that you find on the SBA webpage is a much more streamlined application. It's fairly straightforward and simple. And I urge business owners who need financing to get their businesses back online to apply. The term can be up to 30 years on the SBA's disaster loan. The interest rate for business owners is 3.75%, and for private nonprofits, 2.75%. The CARES Act activated the opportunity for businesses to also apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. And that too will be administered by SBA with the help of the U.S. Treasury. That loan program is going to work radically different from our traditional disaster loan program. Under our traditional disaster program, you apply to SBA directly and you get the money directly through electronic funds transfer from the federal government. Under the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, borrowers go to participating banks, and by the time we get off this phone, every bank will be eligible to make these loans to business owners. And those loans are offered at 0.5% interest for a term of up to 2 years. The first 6 months don't require payment at all, but the interest does accrue. And it can be used for payroll and associated expenses like taxes and benefits, as well as mortgage interest payments, rent payments, and utility payments. So the application is online and it's a one-pager. It is several check boxes you have to go through and certifications you must make. The application, as Mr. Sanchez said, will run through participating banks. Starting this Friday, small businesses and solo practitioners or sole proprietors can begin applying for the PPP. Next Friday, independent contractors and self-employed folks can apply for PPP. So the effort is full scale. We are looking to get our businesses back online because one of the things we know, of course, at SBA is that it is small businesses that are the engine of our economy. They are the employers of 99% of all employees come from small businesses, and they are responsible for 2/3 of the net new jobs that are created in our economy. So it is imperative that they get back online as soon as possible. And so the CARES Act has done a lot to hopefully move businesses in that direction. I also wanted to mention that SBA has initiated an automatic payment of existing SBA 7A loans for the next 6 months. So as borrowers who have loans under the SBA 7A program won't have to worry about that when they're worrying about the calculations of their cash flow. So there's a bunch of opportunities for businesses to manage their cash flow through assistance from the federal government. And we in the South Florida District Office are conducting webinars from 9 to 5 of them all day, along with virtual office hours 5 times a day. Of those 5 and 5 sessions, 1 each is being offered in Spanish daily. So we are making every effort to get the information out to the public about who we are, what we're doing to help respond to the COVID pandemic and disaster. So I look forward to any questions you all might have, but that's pretty much my spiel.
Thank you, Ms. Harris, and I'm glad you brought up the terms of the new Paycheck Protection Program. And before we go into a few of the details, just as a rehash, for those of you who are on the line, there really are 4 loans that have been identified that many of you may be able to qualify for. The new ones are the emergency loan for $10,000. The major new one from the CARES Act is the Paycheck Protection Program loan, where you could get up to $10 million, up to $10,000 for the emergency loan that you could roll into the $10 million loan. Then, of course, there are existing loans that have been discussed here so far, the disaster loan that Ms. Harris talked about, and the bridge loan that Mr. Hadden with the SBDC has talked about. So those are going to be the main ones in your tool chest as you navigate during the pandemic. And I've heard varying terms through our research, Ms. Harris, on the Paycheck Protection Program. So I want to, it bears repeating the terms that people are going to see for the Paycheck Protection Act as far as if they do end up owing money, because I've seen different ranges, and I know we had the 4% cap, but you mentioned an interest rate below that. So if you do end up owing some money back for the Paycheck Protection Program because you couldn't keep 100% of payroll, what are those terms likely going to look like again?
Actually, I'm glad you asking questions because it helps me to clarify as well. Because I did not mention that under the PPP, up to 75% of the loan givable if used for payroll, rent, mortgage interest payments, and utility payments. So I neglected to mention that, and that's really important.
Sure.
And I want to make sure folks know that is to also add on this, that please, please, please keep good records, because you're going to have to demonstrate that you use the money the ways that you use the money in order to get the loan forgiveness. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then I do not have any information about what happens to the loan after the 2-year term. As I understand it, it's due and owing after 2 years. So hopefully with 75% of the balance being forgivable because of the use of towards payroll, it'll be a substantially smaller amount that may be manageable over the 18 months, particularly since the interest rate is only 0.5%.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Harris. And we expect if people can maintain 100% of payroll, it will be forgiven. And of course, Ms. Harris gave us great advice on maintaining proper payroll records, business expense records, so that we could determine that. The best terms that I have been able to glean so far are potentially for these loans, if the amount's not forgiven, 6 to 12 months of deferral period, 10-year amortization schedule, and a cap at 4% interest with no prepayment penalty. So Ms. Harris, if you wouldn't mind over the next few days getting back to our office on if those terms are need to be amended, or if there's other things that we need to keep in mind, I'm sure everybody here would greatly appreciate that.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we were honored to be able to provide the SBA with over $675 million to help manage this loan program with the over 800 partnering banks and other lending institutions. And obviously, we heard a lot about that from Ms. Harris. Many of you may know I served in the state legislature for 10 years prior to getting to Congress, but some of you may not know I was also a small business owner for that 10 years and for 5 years preceding, where I had to make a payroll twice a month for 15 years and pay my employees, make sure we could pay the health benefits and meet that bottom line. So I know what it's like to have to make a payroll and the leap of faith that it is and the hard work it is, knowing that if you don't command and will it with your blood, sweat, and tears, it won't happen. And so I have a good sense of what so many of you are going through right now, wondering how you're going to make that next utility payment or mortgage payment or rent payment, or particularly payroll, and what it can mean to have a huge drop in business, like I saw in my law practice in 2008, right as the Great Recession started. So we have an understanding of the urgency, and that is one of the main reasons we wanted to be here today. We're going to go into questions in just a few more minutes. I wanted to talk a little bit about where we will be going from here, and then we're going to open it up to questions, because I know a lot of you will have those questions. And I did want to talk a little bit about our survey. So first, thank you to the small businesses who replied to our COVID-19 small business survey. Very helpful to give us an idea of what you're facing. We had 23 responses. We had several businesses who had employees who contracted the COVID-19 virus. We had, of the folks responding, at least 13 of them had a decline in hours or layoffs, and 4 who said no. We had several major businesses, which I'll identify, and then the small businesses we will keep anonymous, like like Legoland and Disney and Universal and others that are either paying their employees or, in the case of many of them, furloughing their employees until at least the next couple of weeks. We had some small contractors who had to reduce hours. Some had to, some professional organizations needed to close locations. We had restaurants who had to temporarily lay off 25 employees. We had psychological counseling centers that had to lay off employees. We had some manufacturers who had to lay off literally almost two-thirds of their employees. We had a response from the Orlando Economic Partnership, which is a public agency, so I can mention that, not able to maintain membership due to membership costs, which is understandable. We had some of our local chambers in Polk County discuss loss of revenue due to inability to recruit new members and cancellation of events and fundraisers. Legoland responded that the resort is closed at least until April 14th. We had some real estate professionals, buyers and listing volume and shows have nearly vanished, according to some of our local real estate companies and realtors. From local healthcare clinics, there's been a reduction in patient visits that has led to a consolidation of dental clinics from 10 to 4. We know as we're combating the coronavirus that a lot of elective procedures have either been rescheduled or not scheduled. We've seen some other consultants cut hours and temporarily close new locations. The other thing we find very helpful is the ranking of assistance. The top request is payroll grants, and we have talked about them at length. We're going to answer your questions in a moment. The next is tax incentives. So one of the tax incentives that we didn't get to go over, there's actually two of them in the CARES Act, and I'm glad this came up. One, we will have an ability to expedite business deductions such as losses to really be able to have a more robust either lowering of your tax liability or potentially return for the lucky, those of you who have no tax liability at the end of the year. I know a lot of small businesses do. In addition, we have deferred payroll taxes. So you could defer 50% of your 2020 payroll taxes to 2021 and the other 50% to 2022. So that's going to help out. We're also have encouraged our state and local officials to have programs to defer state and local taxes the best they can. Other requests, delaying payroll tax deposits. So we know that is covered there. Another thing in tax incentives, any relief for income, payroll, and sales and taxes. So the payroll includes you as small business owners to the extent that you're in your payroll already. So you all, in addition to being able to float your payroll for the next 2.5 months, will include you with regard to your payroll, and you're going to want to talk to your lender about the nuts and bolts of that as well. Unemployment benefits, we talked about that already. $600 per week for up to 4 months through the federal benefit we just passed through the CARES Act, and also that's on top of the existing $275 per week for up to 12 weeks in the state unemployment benefit as well. Others, rent forgiveness. We talked a little bit about encouraging our local lenders and landlords to work with their small businesses. HUD already issued a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions for HUD-backed mortgages for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And we also, as I mentioned earlier in the call, led a letter where the Supreme Court answered the call of our bipartisan delegation letter by suspending writs of possession. So that means that the final act that would cause people to have to get kicked out of their homes based on an eviction or foreclosure procedure is suspended at least until April 17th. So while these processes can continue through court, the final act of evicting people or vacating because of foreclosure cannot happen during the pandemic. We expect that April 17th order to probably be extended, given we will see a peak likely around May 9th. Additional support needs, hand sanitizers and masks, broadband to help with remote work, smart city data hub that would allow virus tracking, telehealth, and symptom monitoring with AI, new state regulation to prevent abuse of landlords for lack of payment, ensuring the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan Program does not disqualify businesses from the new SBA loan. We're going to pivot to Carl in a minute to talk about that question, since that's a good one, including the C6 organizations and stimulus packages. I believe that's our chambers, which I believe were not included other than a lot of other nonprofits were included. So we will take that feedback back. And last, consider looking at stimulus models from UK and Denmark with payments to companies for retention of employees. Carl, I'm going to pivot to you for this question before going to what's next. Will the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan program, if you qualify for it, disqualify businesses for the new SBA loans?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. You could actually apply for each of the three loans, the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan, the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the Payment Protection Program. There are some caveats, and Victoria can probably talk to it as well, between the Economic Injury Loan and the Payment Protection Loan. You can get both loans, but you cannot, the proceeds for the loan have to be used for a different purpose. So you apply for the Economic Injury Loan and say, well, I need to pay payroll for these 2 months, and then turn around and apply for the Payment Protection Loan and saying I need money for those same 2 months of payroll. So you can get both loans, you just can't double dip in the use of funds.
Thank you. Ms. Harris, any other things to add to that?
Yes, all of that's correct. You can apply for multiple loan programs. If you have an existing SBA loan, whether it's a guaranteed loan in the 7A program or 504, if you have a disaster loan from Michael or Irma, none of that prevents you from applying for these loans that are out now. The only one caveat I would say, though, is that at any current policy, and anything can change, current policy is that you cannot have in the aggregate more than $5 million in SBA assistance.
Thank you for that clarification. Last, before we go into questions, I'm going to talk about what to expect next. We expect a fourth package to be introduced with ideas already being discussed in May for long-term recovery. This will first ensure investments in our preparedness for future pandemics, including providing additional relief for our healthcare systems should we need it, which we expect we probably will. In addition, we could see additional relief to small and large businesses, to individuals, and state and local governments as necessary. So while this program will float payrolls for small businesses across the nation to as long as June 30th, we will re-examine whether that is the right deadline as we go forward. And finally, what I believe will be the cornerstone of this long-term recovery is a long-term infrastructure investment to help a major rebuild of America's infrastructure, as well as help foster lasting economic growth, to rebuild America's hospitals, roads and bridges, airports, ports, rail, transit, energy grid, and broadband. This could present us with a unique opportunity to get the Beyond I-4 Ultimate funding sooner than initially anticipated. Many of you may know we have the I-4 Ultimate project going on right now, that in our district, and just a little north of it at 434 in Orange County, Beyond I-4 Ultimate would bring those additional 4 lanes all the way down to 27. Absolutely critical for so many residents in South Orange, Osceola, and Polk counties, and those traveling through those corridors. And it would go up through Seminole County and Volusia County. So there's some great opportunities for long-term infrastructure needs for our region. So with that, we're here to take your questions. And Sheyla, if you wouldn't mind starting the question portion of our program at this point.
Yes, everyone. So now we're going to turn to that portion, or that session of our call. Just remember that to unmute yourself, you need to press *6 if you're calling in by phone. And you can also press the unmute button on the top right-hand corner of your video screen to unmute yourself. State your name, the entity that you represent, and being mindful to mute yourself when you're not speaking so we don't interrupt the call. If you have any questions, and a lot of you have been sending questions, you'll see that there is a Zoom chat box on the bottom of your screen. You can send them there as well. I do have a big list of questions already sent over. And if you have any technical difficulty, feel free to send a message there as well. Please keep in mind that this call is being recorded because we're going to share it publicly. And if you'd like to ask a question now, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
And please keep your questions to 30 seconds to be mindful of others, and we look forward to hearing you.
Hello. This is Adolfina Ortiz, president of the Hispanic American Professional Business Women Association. We have a diversity membership. Highly 50% of my membership, they are business owners, small business owners, or are self-employed. So I just need to confirm, basically, if I understood the information about the payroll protection loans, anyone that has 1,500 employees or less can apply for those loans. So this will be very beneficial for those small businesses.
Thank you for that great question. It is 500 employees or less, not 1,500. So hopefully that clarification will help out. 500 employees or less, you can qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program. For businesses over 500, we have a large business fund that with over $500 billion. So you're going to also want to reach out to your lenders. I'm not going to go too into that because many of those types of businesses have the lawyers and accountants and others on staff to help work with them. But as to your self-employed individuals that you discussed, yes, you are correct. They will qualify. Sole proprietors, independent contractors, anybody who works in the gig economy, they can qualify, and they may be able to qualify for an income of up to $100,000 through the payroll protection loan. So you will be operating like any other business. And for those of the sole proprietors, independent contractors, and other gig economy employees who no longer have work because your business can't run under the circumstances we have right now, you will be eligible for the $600 federal unemployment benefit under the expanded definition we passed under the CARES Act, but you would not be eligible for the $275 state unemployment benefit because they have not amended that in any way since the crisis has begun. I do want to say one more thing. We put in $25 million for language assistance. Por todo mi gente quien puede hablar en español es su idioma primero. Usted puede contactar el SBA para más información en su idioma también. For those of folks my people who speak Spanish as their first language, as I said in Spanish, you can contact the SBA for information, and the websites are bilingual. So thank you for those great questions.
Thank you, Congressman.
Congressman Soto, I wanted to follow up on that about the payment protection plan, because there was another question in the chat regarding the dates to apply, and that depends on the type of business that you are. If you're a small business or a sole proprietorship, you can begin applying for the PPP this Friday. But if you are an independent contractor type of a entity, you would be able to apply starting April 10th. So both, you're absolutely correct, Congressman. It covers all of those types of workers and all of those types of businesses, but the date to begin applying is different depending on the type of business.
Thank you, Mr. Hadden, for that qualification, and I'll remind or I'll mention to both Ms. Harris and Mr. Hadden, this is free flowing, so as you feel you can supplement answers or just add things that you'd like to mention, feel free. Please just speak up and we will accommodate you. Let's turn to the next question.
My name is Albert Hurtado. I'm a CPA partner with Geller Reagan's firm downtown Orlando. And I'm glad you brought, thank you. I'm glad you brought up the payroll tax deposit deferral commentary a little while ago. But there's a subsection in the CARES Act that says that if you have any part of the PPP loan forgiven, that you don't qualify for the payroll tax deposit deferral. So I was wondering if anybody on the line had information related to the timing for cash flow concerns for small businesses, is that if they start deferring payroll taxes now, that if they eventually get any of the PPP loan forgiven, are they going to then receive penalties for not depositing the payroll taxes under the deferral? Or if they're expecting to apply for debt forgiveness, then they should be continuing to make their payroll tax deposits.
Thank you, first of all, for that clarification. It brings up an important point that I want to mention to all small businesses on the phone. While yes, I am an attorney admitted to the Florida Bar, I encourage all of you to reach out to the professionals like accountants and attorneys we've traditionally reached out to in conjunction to this, because there are going to be some very nuanced issues in a massive bill like this. And thank you for bringing up that aspect of it, of being able to use the payroll deferment in the alternative. And those are the types of decisions you're going to want to speak to your professionals like accountants, tax attorneys, and others to make those decisions. And with that, I'm going to open up that question to first Ms. Harris and then Mr. Hadden.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question really underscores the necessity to keep good business records. Keep in mind that the PPP is for payroll for 8 weeks after you get the money for the PPP. So it's not retroactive for payroll, it's forward. And it includes the taxes that you would have to pay, as I understand it. So that's why you wouldn't be able to defer, because you should have been paying it with the PPP money, is my kind of take on what I've read so far in the question. So I just really urge business owners to keep good records. One gentleman in the chat said to me privately, do I think it's a good idea to open a different bank account for the PPP money? That, I think, would make things very clean when you go to substantiate your use of the funds, so that you don't run into any snafus or complications when it comes time to demonstrate how you use the money, because you do want it forgiven if you can get that.
Well, there you have it, a great helpful tip. Mr. Hadden, anything you'd like to add?
I can't speak to the deferral question, but I can mention that as long as the business, regarding the emergency bridge loan at the state level, as long as the business has between 2 and 100 employees, and those employees can include 1099 independent contractors, they are eligible for the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan Program. So it doesn't have any rules as far as, like Ms. Harris said, being used for future wages versus past wages. So that could be an opportunity for this gentleman to get some funding to meet his immediate need.
And thanks for bringing that up, because there was a cash flow element of that question. And Mr. Hadden brought up the bridge loan. And Mr. Hadden, what's the total amount for the bridge loan that you could qualify for, should you be able to qualify?
The standard bridge loan is up to $50,000, but depending on the average monthly operating expenses of the company, there's a multiplier to where they may qualify for up to $100,000. But we would need to look at their, get a copy of the most recent tax return and do that calculation. But the hard cap is $100,000 for any business.
Thank you. And I know we have the emergency loan for up to $10,000 on the federal level. Ms. Harris, is there anything you'd like to add as far as doing that as well?
Well, certainly if folks need assistance, they should be applying to SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It does go up to $2 million. It does have a term of 30 years. I understand why people are attracted to the PPP. It has, the forgiveness element, small interest rate. So I get that, but the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan can help you with all kinds of things, all kinds of bills that you have due and owing. Now, our disaster loan program is not for the replacement of lost profits or revenues, but you can use it for everything the PPP calls for and more. But I just do want to remind y'all that what Mr. Hadden said is true. You cannot use SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan for the same purposes that you use the PPP. And what I mean is at the same time. So if you have an SBA disaster loan that you've been using to make payroll now and you apply for the PPP, you need to keep good records that show that you use the PPP money to make payroll so that you can make a claim for the forgiveness element later. And then you would just switch from how you were using the SBA loan to you wouldn't use those funds for payroll anymore. You'd switch to something else. And then perhaps even after the 8 weeks are up for the PPP, you could go back to making payroll with the SBA money. So there's a lot to consider when you think about borrowing all this money. And do remember that these are loans. They are loans. So you must pay them back, particularly if you don't comply with the requirements under the PPP. And regardless, you're going to have to pay back the SBA loan. So just keep that in mind. The $10,000 that is called a loan advance, but it's apparently actually a grant, is a grant. That part doesn't have to be repaid, but anything beyond that would be.
So a couple key tips there. The emergency loan, the advance talked about by Ms. Harris, is not only a grant and it can be rolled into the payroll protection program loan, but we heard tips about making sure to reach out to your accountant and or attorney to be able to monitor this stuff correctly and getting key tips, and also potentially using the Payroll Protection Act through a separate bank account so that you can keep more naturally isolated records that you're going to need to get up to 100% of that forgiven. And again, if you keep your payroll at 100%, you get 100% of that loan forgiven. So that's why those records are going to be absolutely critical. Next, we're going to take our next question.
If I may, there was a question in the chat that I wanted to respond to.
Sure, Ms. Harris, why don't you take that next?
Thank you so much. Please. Camille Carlton asked if, I love this, right? This is why I love working at the Small Business Administration. It's people like Ms. Carlton. She says, I want to expand my business in order to serve more children during the pandemic. And she included the payroll increased costs of that expansion into this loan. Now, the problem is I'm not sure which loan she means, but I just wanted to say that if you want to expand your business, SBA's regular loan guarantee program is available to you. You cannot use SBA disaster loan funds to expand your business. Disaster loan money is exclusively for the use of your ongoing normal expenses that you could not pay because of the disaster. But our 7A loan program is available to you. And if you're anywhere near Mr. Hadden, I'd recommend that you reach out to the Small Business Development Center or any SBDC. They can actually help you pull that loan application together, help you with, doing the numbers to put you in the best position possible as you approach the banks who are the ones that will actually make the loan to you and ask us for a guarantee if they desire that. So I'm glad that you're thinking about expanding your business, and I wish you all the best with that, and let us know how we can help you. But in the short term, please reach out to an SBDC, and you can find the one closest to you on the internet at Florida, all spelled out, floridasbdc.org. I just wanted to jump on that question.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Hadden, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just really appreciate Ms. Harris's plug in the SBDC. She did a great job promoting our services, and we can absolutely help that business owner with applying for an expansion loan. But there were a couple other questions in the chat box that I can answer quickly. Jackie asked if you're an owner of multiple businesses, can you apply for multiple loans? And to answer that question, with the emergency bridge loan, it's per tax return. So if you have two separate business entities that file taxes separately, then each business can apply separately for an emergency bridge loan, even though they have the same owner. And I'll let Ms. Harris speak to at the federal level. I think it's the same thing, but can you comment on that, Ms. Harris?
Yes, that's correct. Businesses with separate tax ID numbers can certainly apply, but we care about the owners. So we will be looking to understand which businesses you own and what businesses you may have as affiliates, because we look at your entire portfolio when we make decisions about the disaster loan program. But I would encourage you to apply absolutely for the economic injury disaster loan program. And I'm not certain how the PPP works with that, but you know, sort of if the standard is what we've just described, it's probably likely too that your individual businesses could apply individually for PPP assistance.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. And then Lewis had a question about it has here on an E2 visa business owner, and he was asking if he was eligible for an emergency bridge loan, and the answer to that is yes. If you're permanent legal resident and you have the required documentation regarding the tax returns for the business and the tax returns for the owner, then yes, you are eligible for the state emergency bridge loan program. Ms. Harris, can you comment on eligibility at the federal level for visa holders?
I'm not sure what the deal is with visa holders, but when I just apply logic, I think it's going to be very challenging for the federal government to make a 30-year note to someone who's not authorized to be in the country for that long. So I'm not sure how that works with visas. And I do know, of course, that the SBA disaster loan program is open and available to U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents.
So we have the disaster loan applying, and I believe based on the terms, to the best of my knowledge, the payroll protection program would also, that individual would also be eligible. That came up on a call yesterday, but we will continue to seek information on a multi-thousand-page bill as we're navigating through these issues. And let's take the next video question at this point.
Hi, this is Gabi Ortigoni with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for hosting this. You already mentioned the challenge that chambers of commerce and trade associations are confronting right now. It's kind of ironic that we are probably the ones in the front lines helping the government educate as many business owners as possible, and we're not protected. So it's very ironic that it's happening right now. I know that we may have an opportunity to apply for the economic injury disaster loan. Maybe we can get the $10,000 grant that Ms. Harris was referring to. But do you see, I mean, of course, that you're in constant communication with your fellow congressmen and women, do you see any possibility of chambers being involved, being included in the next packages? Because right now, I mean, these are so many organizations, and without us, I mean, many business owners will be lost if they don't have the guidance of chambers of commerce.
Gabby, first of all, thanks for all the work you do for small businesses, particularly our Hispanic entrepreneurs. As you know, I'm a big fan of you all and many of the other chambers around. Central Florida, which is why we started our invite going through local chambers to get active business folks involved. I had signed on to various different emails and requests for chambers to be included, and was disappointed that they were not. We will continue to look for other opportunities, the next one being in the long-term package that will likely have some stimulus and short-term recovery aspects to it, to include our local chambers of commerce. I believe in you all, which is why you all were on the front lines, chosen by me personally to help put this together. So we're going to do everything we can. In the meantime, yes, you're correct. There are other SBA loans and SBDC loans you may qualify for, and I urge you to utilize those resources. And in addition, I would be reaching out to our office to see if there's any federal grants that you all may be eligible for as partners to many of the different federal or state agencies with this type of fund, a $2.2 trillion stimulus package. I suspect there may be other grant opportunities beyond just the main payroll protection program for the small businesses that you may be able to utilize to help you through this difficult time.
Thank you, Congressman.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for helping us put this together. Let's turn to the next video question. As we're doing that, after that one, Ms. Hadden and Mr. Hadden and Ms. Harris, feel free to start queuing up a few of the written questions that you'll respond to after this next video question.
Does anybody have anything through video? All right. I'm going to go ahead and give you one of the questions that we've been receiving on our chat, Congressman.
Please.
What about for single member LLC owners? I am an esthetician and I work in my business alone, no employees. I'm sorry if I missed this information, but if I'm understanding correctly, only business expenses could be forgiven, but everything else would be considered a loan that would need to be paid back. Is any of the loan able to be counted as payroll for ourselves since we are forced to stop working, or would we just rely on unemployment?
So for those of you who weren't able to make it onto the call in the beginning, we went over this and it bears repeating. The number of businesses who would qualify are an expansive set of businesses. It would include the single member LLC, just to answer that question right off the bat. But let's talk about the summary again. It's small businesses with 500 employees or less. This includes for-profits, most nonprofits, sole proprietors, LLCs, LLPs, partnerships, and any other type of businesses you can imagine on the for-profit type of entities. And yes, includes one person self-employed companies, including independent contractors and gig economy workers. So you'd be able to seek the payroll protection program loan, which based upon your payroll, you could pay, depending on your past payroll, up to $100,000, a monthly salary that'd be equivalent to $100,000 annually. So what you're paying yourself already, according to your payroll, you'll be able to get a loan for 2.5 months to continue to pay yourself as the sole employee of your partnership or LLC, and that will be able to float you through. And of course, if you're not working, if you're of a business that cannot work right now, given the unique nature of our economy with stay-at-home orders and the coronavirus, you would be eligible for the $600 in federal unemployment benefits that we just passed through the CARES Act. That would be weekly for up to 4 months. But unfortunately, the state of Florida has very poor unemployment benefits. You wouldn't be able to qualify for them, first of all. Second of all, they're $275 a week for only 12 weeks. So for those of you wondering what you could do to help beef up the state unemployment, contact your state legislators. contact the governor and the cabinet, and we're hopeful they'll step up too. So hopefully that helps you all out. And I do want to mention one more thing. Some of you, I know, because I was a practicing commercial attorney for many years, may not have paid yourself through payroll and just took draws, which you're not supposed to do, but I know a lot of people do it. So maybe Ms. Harris might be able to answer this. If there is no payroll for the independent contractor, if they just took draws, would they be able to qualify under the payroll protection program? Maybe you might be familiar with being able to answer that question. I know it's technical, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. And the thing is that Treasury and SBA are working together really to understand the CARES Act and kind of piece together those nuances. Because my understanding is, the goal was to be helpful, right? So to our small businesses. And I think generally speaking, the message we've received at SBA is that, we are looking to be helpful, to get to yes. That's what our administrator is encouraging. So I think I would say to people, look, apply. Don't say no for us, right? Let us say no if that's the answer. But don't talk yourself out of applying if that's something you need. But I would say also be thoughtful about your application. Be sure that you're paying attention to what you're applying for, what it requires, how you're going to deploy the funds, to be strategic about that. And again, the Small Business Development Center can help you with that. They don't charge for their services. It's high quality services. So just apply, apply. And then, but be mindful of those details as you go along, but the details are coming out little by little, day by day. So be on the lookout for those answers.
Thanks for that. So for those of you who are independent contractors or small businesses that that pay yourself through payroll like you're supposed to, you should be A-okay. For those who take out draws, you still may be A-okay, and we're gonna get a more thorough answer on that. We're going to go to the next written question now. Unless, do either of our panelists have particular questions they saw on the screen that you want to pick first?
This is Carl with the SBDC. There was one question from, I believe it was Ken, who had a question about existing SBA loans. So if you already have an SBA loan that you're making payments on, part of the CARE Act included the Small Business Debt Relief Program, which within that program, that means that the SBA is going to cover those payments for 6 months. So if you're an existing SBA loan holder, there is still relief in the CARE Act for you, not just for new SBA loan seekers.
Thank you for that. And we're going to take one last written question, and then I'm going to close from there. And of course, anybody who submitted a question, we should be able to get you a response over the next few days, and we will certainly be responding to all questions received. So this is not the end of the conversation. It is just in the beginning. And Sheyla, let's take one last written question that you saw.
It says here, one from Jose Cerda. I understand that the interest is payable even if the principal is forgiven with the PPP, correct?
My understanding is no, as long as you clear 100% of payroll. There's only interest for the amount you don't get forgiven. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have $3,000 a month in payroll as your monthly average, and that is an expanded definition. It includes salaries, it includes benefits and healthcare costs and things like that. You're going to want to look to the U.S. Chamber handout that we sent to you, or the instructions for the SBA application along with the SBA application for that encompassing definition. But let's say your total average monthly payroll costs are $3,000 and you apply for a loan for $8,000 immediately to help fund the next 2.5 months of payroll, and you use it to fund and you pay 100% of that payroll, then 100% of that loan, including any interest that may have otherwise accrued, will be forgiven. So the only interest and that accrues is if you end up borrowing money above that payroll forgiven portion, or you use some of these other important loans that people will probably rely on, like the emergency bridge loan on the state level that Mr. Hadden talked about, or the $10,000 emergency grant on the federal level. That one you'll be able to roll into and perhaps not have to pay back. And then, of course, we heard about the disaster loan by Ms. Harris as well that would come with interest. So let's be very clear, and this is a great way to end. We enacted the CARES Act with the Paycheck Protection Program to keep small businesses running, to keep them holding their payrolls at 100% with every incentive to do so, and to keep Central Floridians working, which is why we took the unprecedented step. I know many of you, as you're hearing the details for the first time, may almost be in disbelief that you could possibly have the next 2.5 months of your payroll paid by the federal government. But that's really our response to the sign of the times that we are in. This is an unprecedented crisis. When you all see the fear that you must be experiencing, that, and me as a small business owner for 15 years understand, how are you gonna make that next payroll? How are you gonna make that next rent payment? How are you gonna pay for your utilities and technology and the other things you absolutely need and other supplies to keep your businesses running? Well, we understand that. And that's why we took this major step with the payroll protection program and the $367 billion to help out small businesses across this nation. And we will reanalyze the situation in May with the long-term recovery package, where we may even extend some of these deadlines and extend some of these programs. But we hear you. We know this is a crisis, and know that to all the small businesses in Florida's 9th congressional district, in Central Florida, and across the nation, help is on the way. And we need you to use the very initiative that got you into small businesses, the very initiative that you expanded your small businesses and increased the amount of revenue you have, that get or done attitude that you have day in, day out to keep your business running. We need you to use that now to contact your lenders and start applying this Friday and early next week for some of you who are the self-employed and others that we talked about. That'll be for next week. Work with your lenders that you already work with, or you can work with the SBDC. Thank you, Mr. Hadden, for your sage advice and being here today, given your busy schedule. And thank you also to Ms. Harris from the SBA. You both are a godsend. And we want to thank also, just to finalize, our other two guests, Mr. Altig and Mr. Sanchez, for appearing on the call. Everyone stay healthy and continue to work hard, and together we will get past this. This soon shall pass. And with that, that concludes our small business tele-town hall, and we will respond to other questions going forward. And this town hall will be available via video on Facebook for those business owners who couldn't be on today. Be well, everyone. Stay safe, and God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Hadden.